Okay, so as you know, for those of you who have read the exemplar response on changing foreign relations, this PowerPoint will be going into a little bit more detail into what Amenhotep III and Akhenaten did in terms of changing relations. So just expanding on what was in that PowerPoint in a little bit more detail. So post-Amarna period and Amarna period pharaohs and what they did in terms of relationships with the Mitanni and the Hittites. So this first part will be on Amenhotep III. Keep an eye out for the background, and you'll see this image of Amenhotep III in the background when it relates to Amenhotep III, and then it changes for Akhenaten. Alright, so even though Amenhotep III had to deal with minor incidents in Nubia in Year 5 and maintained a military presence in Western Asia, he governed his empire by a policy of diplomacy, and it was relatively peaceful. As we heard in the previous video, Egypt was at its prime, in its prime during his reign. And he communicated and maintained relations by communicating by a letter with the great kings, by negotiating alliances, by adding foreign princesses to the royal harem, by exchanging gifts to the brother kings, and by employing highly trusted envoys who travelled throughout the east. Letters used excessive flattery. And we always know that, generally speaking, they say things like, "Behold, I am a faithful servant of the king, I have not rebelled," and they use excessive flattery, usually followed by a complaint, but generally speaking, this indicates positive relationships that he had with these nations. Letters between brother kings. So communications with free and independent rulers were categorized by great kings and lesser kings, particularly if they had to negotiate a marriage between one of their daughters. So we know that there was a lot of foreign and diplomatic marriages between Amenhotep III and foreign princesses. So most of the communications from brother kings to Amenhotep were in friendly but a self-assured tone. However, they do reveal, and Steendorf and Steele have been quoted to say, the relationship between Amenhotep and these kings was built upon a purely materialistic foundation. So yes, they exchanged well wishes and gifts and things like that, but it was all materialistic in the sense that if you give me what I want, I'll give you what you want. Diplomatic marriages, they weren't not only a means of maintaining friendly relations, but a way of obtaining these luxury goods. So Amenhotep III had foreign princesses sent to, he was sent to Egypt with rich dowries and accompanied by caravans of luxurious gifts. Their fathers were expected valuable items, particularly gold, in return for their daughters. And this was a continuing obligation. And judging by the complaints of the Babylonian king, Kadashman Enlil, Amenhotep III didn't write frequently enough or treat him with respect. And it took Amenhotep 6 years to reply to his letter when he was sick. So in addition to this, is a concept of business transactions comes through in his reign. So the regular exchange of gifts was expected after marriage. This was nothing more than a trade, and involved complaints and haggling. These kings didn't hesitate to reprimand each other for the failure to live up to their side of a business transaction. So I'll give you my daughter, you give me, gold. Even if one of the kings died before a promised transaction could be completed, the other demanded satisfaction for whoever was the successor, such in the case of Akhenaten, who demanded the Mitannian king demanded the gold statue. Amenhotep had promised Tushratta of Mitanni 2 gold statues but died. Akhenaten didn't honor his promise and was reprimanded and delivered 2 wooden statues covered in gold, and this incident caused a lot of bitterness because this business transaction wasn't honored. One-sided marriage arrangements. So marriage arrangements often were one-sided. As we know, never was an Egyptian princess sent to a foreign court, and perhaps the Egyptian pharaohs at this time regarded themselves as preeminent among their brother kings. And despite persistent requests from the king, never has a daughter, Amenhotep III replied, never has a daughter of an Egyptian king been sent to anyone. Foreign wives. From year 10, it appears the king gave himself over to the pleasures of the harem. Apart from his great royal wife, Amenhotep is known to have married at least 7 foreign princesses from areas such as Mitanni, Babylon, and Syria. Gilukepa, he marries her in year 10. She comes with an entourage of 317 ladies in waiting. This was celebrated with a special issue of large scarabs. Didn't affect his affections for tea. In fact, her name with those of the mother and father were included on the scarab. Babylonian princess. So Amenhotep III married Kadashman-Enlil's, the sister of the Babylonian king. Kadashman-Enlil's the sister, and then also requested Kadashman-Enlil's daughter. A great deal of haggling took place between these two kings over the proposed marriage. The Babylonian king had agreed to send his daughter in return for a huge shipment of gold to complete his palace. Kadashman-Enlil warned Amenhotep that if the gold arrived late, he would not send his daughter to Egypt. Apparently negotiations went on for some time, and the Babylonian king seemed to have a second thoughts about his daughter's marriage. And he said, "Indeed, you want my daughter in marriage, but my sister, whom my father gave you, is with you there. No one has seen her recently or knows whether she is alive or dead." Eventually, Amenhotep must have satisfied his demands, for the princess joined the Egyptians' king's harem. And then also the daughter of Tarkundadu of Azawa in Asia Minor also married Amenhotep. The marriage arrangements with the Tushratta of Mitanni. Towards the end, he'd arranged to the new Mitannian king Tushratta and to marry his daughter Tadukepa, like other kings. This king wanted gold in return for his daughter's hand. It's not known whether the aging pharaoh actually married her, because she's next heard as the wife of Akhenaten. It increased Amenhotep's status to have a harem full of royal daughters of the most powerful rulers in the east. However, the king also demanded of his representatives abroad to find beautiful women to be sent as concubines. The following extract is from instructions he sent to a prince in Palestine. I'm sending you Colonel Kanania to procure fine concubines, silver, gold, linen garments, various precious stones, total 40 concubines. So he's saying that he wants these foreign concubines to come here, and it says in the last line, "So send very fine concubines in whom there is no blemish." Okay, so that's a little bit on just Amenhotep III and what he did in terms of his relations. And you could see sort of the pretext of it was a lot of foreign princesses, a lot of business transaction, diplomatic marriages, letters sent, gifts exchanged, etc. Now let's have a look at what Akhenaten did. So Akhenaten's changing relations with the Mitanni and the Hittites. Akhenaten and the kingdom of the Mitanni. Since the time of Thutmose IV, Egypt and the Mitanni had been on friendly terms, and this cordial relationship was cemented by the marriage of a Mitannian princess to several Egyptian kings. Of all the great kings in the east, Tushratta of Mitanni seems to have had the closest relationship with Egypt during Amenhotep III's reign. After his death, Amenhotep III's death, Tushratta sent a letter to Akhenaten saying that he was 10 times closer to him than he had been to his father. Akhenaten's treatment of Tushratta. He doesn't seem to have treated him very well. It says here with a certain amount of indifference he treated the Mitannian king. According to the correspondence from Tushratta, Akhenaten refused to honour his father's promise to send gifts, that of the gold statue, failed to answer his letters, and even kept a Mitannian messenger waiting at the Egyptian court for 4 years before giving a reply to one piece of correspondence. Why he behaved this way, it's not known. Akhenaten also seems to have no interest in Tushratta's internal problems. The Mitannian king was faced with 2 palace revolutions during his reign, and a government in exile was set up to oppose him. The Egyptian government's lack of concern for the fortune of Tushratta allowed the dynamic young Hittite king, Suppiluliuma, to exploit the situation. So as you can see here, Akhenaten is not treating the Mitannian king with respect, and the Mitannian king is obviously not impressed and is going to turn or be weak in terms of being then taken over by the double game-playing Hittite king Suppiluliuma. Hittite attack on Mitanni. Suppiluliuma undermined the relationship between Egypt and the Mitanni by writing to Akhenaten, playing the double game, congratulating him on his accession, sending him gifts, so just to keep things happy with him whilst he's then planning things elsewhere. Redford suggests that Akhenaten may have signed a treaty with him despite strong objections from some of Egypt's allies. Suppiluliuma also supported the Mitannian prince in exile and launched a surprise attack on Tushratta, forcing the king and members of the Mitannian court to abandon their capital. Tushratta was later assassinated, and with his death, the great power of the Mitanni ceased. Dun dun dun. So, Akhenaten treats the Mitannian king with disrespect. He loses power. Suppiluliuma takes advantage of this and gets rid of the threat of the Mitannian Empire, and so there we have the death of the Mitannian Empire. Appeals from northern Syria for help. Okay, so Hittite king's attacking. He's got power now. There's no Mitanni to deal with. And they had been in an alliance with the Mitanni, and these former vassal states of the Mitanni didn't like the idea of becoming a part of the Hittite Empire and formed an alliance against Suppiluliuma. Several leaders wrote to Akhenaten pleading for help. Based on the former brotherhood that had existed between the kings of Mitanni and Egypt, they hoped Akhenaten would send a military force to support them against the Hittites now that the Mitanni weren't there to help them. So one of the letters sent by Quatanum states, "All these kings are indeed servants of my lord. If the king my lord so desires, he marches out. But they say the king my lord will not march out, so let my lord dispatch archers and send them. Come. Let my lord's ministers say that what shall be their tribute and shall pay for it." Another letter says, "If my lord does not wish to march forth, then let him send one of his commissioners with troops and chariots." You can sense this desperation they want for help. Before any letter could reach Egypt, Suppiluliuma swept into northern Syria, attacking those cities which failed to give him allegiance. This area remained in the hands of the Hittites for the next 170 years. So you can see here that Akhenaten has lost the Mitannian Empire. These other smaller vassal towns are trying to compete against this growing force that is the Hittites. They're asking Akhenaten for help, and he's not sending it. So possible reasons for the king's action. So why was he so careless? Why did he not help? Akhenaten took no action to help these former vassals of the Mitanni. And why? Redford suggests that Akhenaten would have had to have sent a force of at least 1,000 men to make any impression against the Hittites. And he wasn't prepared to do this in light of the instability of his own dependencies, with which we're probably talking about the religious revolution which he's dealing with at home. On the other hand, perhaps the Egyptian king, preoccupied with his new god, considered that the affairs of these northern Syrian cities were of no concern to him. He didn't really fully understand the threat. Suppiluliuma refrained from threatening any of Egypt's dependencies at this stage, so they weren't really taking any of Egypt's direct vassal towns, but were forming a friendly alliance with the Aziru, Prince of Amu, which was one of Egypt's northernmost dependencies. It was a vassal town of Egypt. The Prince Amaru had been playing a double game with Egypt for some time. And remember, they're directly adjacent to the Hittite kingdom, very close to the Hittite empire, whilst also being close to Egypt and being a vassal town of Egypt, meaning they're not independent, they're paying tax and tribute to Egypt. It wasn't until the reign of Tut that the Hittite and the Egyptian forces came into direct conflict. The double game played by leaders, and we know what happened here. Aziru carves out an independent state for himself, wants to carve out an independent state for himself, while still playing the double game with Egypt and assuring him of his loyalty. Aziru is following the Hittites in terms of undermining Egypt's Egyptian power in central Syria and supporting him in his endeavors. So he's supporting the Hittites. The chief areas which he coveted were the wealthy city-states of the Phoenician coast, Simra, Sidon, Tyre, and Byblos. In his letters to Akhenaten, Aziru denounced the loyal leaders of these cities as traitors and enemies of Egypt. A warlike desert tribe called the Habiru also helped him seize control of Egypt's coastal dependencies. Byblos appeals for help. Rib-Adi sends out letters to Akhenaten requesting for assistance. The first coastal city to fall was Simra. Aziru had blockaded and destroyed it. The elders of the city of Tunip had sent a letter warning Akhenaten that this would happen. Akhenaten still not replying. Letter after letter was sent to Akhenaten by the leaders of cities threatened by Aziru, but they received no support as he continued to escape justice. Aziru was taking more and more and getting away with everything. The leaders of Sidon, realizing the Egyptian king would send no help, joined forces with Aziru and then attacked Tyre as well. So the vassal princes are realizing that Egypt's not doing anything. Akhenaten's not going to help us, so if we can't beat them, join them. However, the old ruler's loyalty to the pharaoh seems never to have faltered. Despite Akhenaten's lack of response, it has been suggested that Aziru may have had a friendly agent at the court of Akhenaten who kept the king mud. So, perhaps there was an issue with communication and Akhenaten didn't know what was going on. So when Akhenaten was informed that Rib-Adi had been put to death, he sent a strongly worded letter to Aziru, ordering him to come for investigations. Aziru made up excuse after excuse, saying that he was being threatened by the Hittites as to why he wasn't coming. And when Akhenaten finally sent somebody to go and get him, he brought him to the court. Aziru played on this lack of resolve and continued his double game, even going as far as to entertain the Hittite king's envoys. He goes and gets him. However, Aziru's power, that he continued to influence affairs in central Syria. The successor of Rib-Adi and Byblos wrote to Akhenaten that Aziru committed crimes even after the king had interviewed him, a crime against us. He has sent his men to Etakama, and he has smitten all the lands of Amki, the king's lands, and now he has even sent his men to take possession of the lands of Amki. When Aziru was eventually released, he just joined the Hittites. He was forced to pay an annual tribute to the Hittites and was forbidden from pursuing an independent foreign policy, but at least he didn't have to deal with Egypt anymore. So obviously Supilumir's power was greater than that of Akhenaten at this time. Problems in Palestine. Remember, generally speaking, Egypt has a firm hold of Palestine, so they should be maintaining that. In Palestine, the situation wasn't better. Petty princes who ruled in this area had made frequent attempts to gain independence from Egypt during the reigns. Akhenaten's hesitancy to take military action encouraged some of them to rebel and allowed the Hebiru and the Situ, Bedouin warlike tribesmen to overrun the countryside. So there's all these. They're losing territory in Palestine, as you can see here. Loss of Jerusalem and Megiddo, 2 towns in Palestine. So Megiddo was taken, Jerusalem was taken. They're losing all these towns in Palestine. So the question that's raised is, what sort of a man was Akhenaten that could see his empire crumbling and not lift a finger to save it? Why was he doing this? So one of the things that's been put forth by the scholars is, was there a communication problem? If there was an idealist pacifist, could he watch the slaughter of so many subjects who betray those so faithful to him? The king's reaction may never have been known, but one possible explanation is that the true situation in Syria was not revealed to him. The workings of a complex bureaucracy do not always allow for good communication and sometimes screen for the truth. The writers of the Amarna letters complained that they were being misrepresented by the pharaoh's officials. One of the officials was Tutu, who claimed, "As for the messengers from foreign lands, I was the one who communicated their affairs to the palace." Perhaps Tutu did not pass on all the foreign messages to the king, preferring to deal with some of them himself, so maybe Akhenaten didn't even know what was going on. Even so, allowing for poor communication, for deception, and for any amount of red tape, Akhenaten failed to take action on evidence that would have had his ancestor Thutmose III dashing for the field with any army behind him. So, complacence during the reign of Amenhotep III and inertia and internal distractions during the reign of Akhenaten contribute to the loss of Egypt's control over Syria and Palestine. Okay, so as you can see there, negative connotations coming out in terms of Akhenaten's reign. He's lost a lot of territory. He's not keeping the vassal princes happy. Lots of losses in territory. Hittites are gaining a lot of power. So the questions that I asked you to get done would be just to describe the relationship that they had with the Hittites and the Mitanni, so Amenhotep III. And what did they do for the Mitanni, and what did they do for the Hittites? So just have a look at those questions and please have them finished.